Farmer Michael Tucker stood frozen at the edge of his collapsed barn, staring at something that shouldn't exist. The ancient wooden structure that had stood on his Montana ranch for over 100 years had finally given in to a violent spring storm the night before. But it wasn't the destruction of the historic barn that held him paralyzed. It was what lay revealed in the earth beneath it. There, partially exposed by the collapse, was an intricately carved stone doorway, its surface covered in markings unlike anything he'd ever seen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The 58-year-old third-generation rancher had spent his entire life working this land, just as his father and grandfather had before him. He knew every inch of the property, or at least he thought he did. The Rocky Mountain foothills of western Montana weren't known for their ancient ruins or mysterious underground structures. Yet here was something that defied explanation, something that had been silently waiting beneath his feet for who knows how long. The Tucker Ranch had always been a modest operation, focused primarily on cattle ranching and hay production. The old barn, with its weathered red paint and creaking timbers, had been a constant presence throughout Michael's life. Every morning for decades, he would walk past it on his way to tend to the cattle, never suspecting what lay beneath its foundation. The storm that had torn through the previous night had been particularly fierce, with winds strong enough to uproot several old trees across the property. But as Michael surveyed the damage in the early morning light, he realized that nature's destruction had uncovered something far more significant than fallen timber. The stone doorway was unlike anything that belonged in rural Montana. Its surface was smooth, almost polished, despite being buried for what must have been centuries. The markings that covered it appeared to be some form of writing, but they weren't like any language Michael had ever encountered. They seemed to shimmer slightly in the morning sun, as if they held some inner light of their own. The door itself was massive, standing at least 12 feet tall, and what was visible of its frame suggested it extended even deeper into the earth. As Michael cautiously approached the structure, his boots crunching on the scattered debris from the collapsed barn, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The morning air was unusually still, and the familiar sounds of his ranch, the lowing of cattle, the distant bark of his dog, the chirping of birds, seemed muted, as if the very atmosphere around the doorway was different somehow. He reached out tentatively to touch the stone surface, half expecting it to be an illusion that would disappear at his touch. But his fingers met cool, solid stone. The surface was smooth but not slick, and as his hand moved across the strange markings, he could have sworn he felt a slight vibration, a subtle hum that seemed to resonate through his bones. Michael's mind raced with questions. How long had this been here? What was its purpose? Who had built it? The location made no sense. The nearest Native American settlements he knew of had been miles away, and this didn't match any indigenous architecture he'd ever heard of. The craftsmanship was too precise, too sophisticated for the technology that should have existed in this region's past. He pulled out his phone to take pictures, but to his surprise, the screen was completely blank. He tried to restart it, but nothing happened. The device was dead, despite having been fully charged when he left the house. A chill ran down his spine as he realized this might not be a coincidence. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the barn's wreckage, Michael made a decision. He couldn't keep this to himself. Something this significant needed to be properly investigated. But he also knew that once he got Kururat, his quiet life would never be the same. Whatever this doorway led to, whatever secrets it held, they were about to change everything. He just didn't realize how much. The Tucker Ranch had been struggling long before the mysterious doorway appeared. Michael's thoughts drifted to the mounting challenges as he stood before the ancient structure. The past 5 years had been particularly difficult. Prolonged drought conditions had devastated his hay production, and rising feed costs had forced him to reduce his cattle herd significantly. The bank had been pressuring him about loan payments, and he'd already had to sell off parcels of land just to stay afloat. The old barn's collapse was just the latest in a string of setbacks. He'd been planning to repair its aging roof this spring, but the funds just weren't there. Now, as he stared at the otherworldly doorway beneath its ruins, the barn's destruction seemed almost meaningful, as if fate had intervened to reveal this secret at precisely this moment. Michael's wife Sarah had passed away 3 years ago after a brief battle with cancer, leaving him to manage the ranch alone. Their only son, James, had moved to Seattle for a tech job, making it clear he had no interest in carrying on the family's ranching tradition. The thought of being the last Tucker to work this land weighed heavily on Michael's mind. 4 generations of his family had poured their sweat and dreams into these rolling hills, and now it seemed their legacy might end with him. Last month, he'd received an offer from Western Development Corporation, a company buying up struggling ranches throughout the region to build luxury vacation homes. The number they'd quoted was substantial, enough to pay off all his debts and still leave him comfortable for retirement. He'd been giving it serious consideration, despite the knot it created in his stomach. The thought of watching his family's heritage being carved up into vacation lots for wealthy out-of-staters felt like a betrayal of everything his ancestors had worked for. But now, as he studied the mysterious doorway, those immediate concerns seemed somehow distant. The craftsmanship of the structure was remarkable. The stone blocks fit together so precisely that not even a blade of grass could grow between them. The markings, which he'd initially thought might be decorative, clearly formed some kind of organized system. They were arranged in neat rows and columns, some symbols repeating in patterns that suggested a sophisticated written language. Michael's grandfather had often told stories about the land's history, tales passed down through generations about the indigenous peoples who had lived here before the European settlers arrived. But nothing in those stories had ever mentioned anything like this. The few artifacts they'd occasionally found while working the land, arrowheads, pottery shards, the occasional stone tool, were nothing compared to the technological sophistication this doorway represented. The vibration he'd felt earlier seemed to be growing stronger, or perhaps he was just becoming more attuned to it. It reminded him of standing near heavy machinery, but instead of being loud and jarring, this sensation was subtle, almost soothing. He noticed that the air around the doorway felt different too, slightly warmer than the surrounding morning chill, with a faint metallic taste that reminded him of the air before a thunderstorm. His phone wasn't the only piece of technology acting strangely. The electric fence that kept his cattle in the north pasture had stopped working, despite being on a separate power system from the main ranch buildings. His truck's radio had begun picking up nothing but static when he parked near the barn site. These anomalies added another layer of mystery to the already inexplicable situation. As Michael contemplated his next move, he thought about his father's favorite saying, "The land always provides." The old man had repeated those words during every drought, every harsh winter, every market downturn. Even in the toughest times, the ranch had always found a way to sustain their family. Now, standing before this impossible discovery, those words took on a new meaning. Perhaps the land was providing again, but in a way none of them could have ever imagined. The sun had climbed higher, and Michael knew he needed to make a decision. His first instinct was to contact the university in Bozeman. They had archaeological experts who might be able to make sense of this. But something held him back. The moment he made that call, this discovery would become public knowledge. His quiet ranch would be transformed into a research site, swarming with scientists and probably media too. The peace and solitude he'd always cherished would vanish. Moreover, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply personal about this discovery. 4 generations of Tuckers had walked over this spot, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. Now, at perhaps the lowest point in the ranch's history, this door had revealed itself. That couldn't be a coincidence, couldn't be. Michael spent the next few hours carefully clearing debris from around the doorway, his mind racing with possibilities and concerns. Each piece of splintered wood and twisted metal he removed revealed more of the structure's intricate details. The door itself was set into what appeared to be a larger stone archway, with the mysterious symbols becoming more concentrated near its center. What had initially looked like random markings now seemed to form concentric circles, all focusing on a central point about chest height on the massive door. As he worked, the strange electromagnetic disturbances continued. His wristwatch had stopped at precisely 9:47, the same time he'd first touched the door's surface. The compass he'd brought from his truck spun wildly when held near the structure, and his backup phone showed no signal despite the ranch normally having decent coverage. These anomalies only added to his growing sense that he was dealing with something far beyond ordinary archaeological findings. The decision weighing on Michael's mind wasn't just about who to tell, it was about whether to attempt opening the door himself. Common sense told him to wait for experts, to let archaeologists and scientists handle whatever this was. But there was something else, an almost magnetic pull that made him feel this discovery was meant specifically for him. The timing was too perfect, the location too personal. This wasn't just some random historical artifact. This was something that had been waiting beneath his family's barn for generations. He thought about his late wife, Sarah. She had always been the practical one, the voice of reason that balanced his occasional impulsive tendencies. "Think it through, Mike," she would say whenever he faced a difficult decision. "Look at it from all angles." He could almost hear her voice now urging caution, yet he couldn't help wondering if she would have felt the same inexplicable connection to this discovery that he did. The more he cleared away the debris, the more convinced he became that this wasn't any known type of ancient construction. The precision of the stonework exceeded anything he'd ever seen in historical structures. The edges were perfectly straight, the surfaces impossibly smooth. Even more strange, the entire structure seemed to maintain a constant temperature regardless of the warming day around it. When he pressed his palm against it, the stone felt neither warm nor cool. It was as if it existed in its own environmental bubble. By mid-afternoon, Michael had exposed enough of the doorway to see that it was part of a larger underground complex. The stone walls extended outward in both directions, disappearing into the earth beneath his property. This wasn't just a door. It was an entrance to something much more extensive. The implications made his head spin. How much of his ranch was sitting atop whatever this structure was? What else might be hidden beneath the rolling pastures where his cattle grazed? As he sat on a fallen beam eating the sandwich he'd brought from the house, Michael noticed something he hadn't seen before. The central point of the concentric circles, now cleaned of dirt and debris, had a slight indentation. It was subtle, but in the afternoon light he could see it was perfectly circular, about the size of a silver dollar. The surrounding symbols seemed to radiate outward from this point, like ripples in a pond. His hand moved unconsciously to his shirt pocket, where he kept his father's old silver pocket watch. It had been passed down through the family, given to each generation when they took over management of the ranch. The watch hadn't worked in years. It had stopped the day his father passed away, and Michael had never had the heart to have it repaired. Now, looking at the circular indentation in the door, he couldn't help but notice that the watch was exactly the same size. The implications of what he was considering made him pause. If he was wrong, if this was just his imagination making connections that weren't there, he could potentially damage an invaluable historical artifact. He could destroy evidence that might help explain what this structure was and who had built it. The responsible thing would be to wait, to call in experts who could properly document and study everything before any attempts were made to open the door. But deep down, Michael knew he wasn't going to wait. This was his land, his family's legacy, and somehow he felt certain this discovery was meant for him. Whatever lay beyond that door had chosen this moment to reveal itself, just when he needed it most. The failing ranch, the pressure to sell, his son's disinterest in continuing the family tradition, it all seemed connected to this moment of decision. With trembling fingers, Michael removed the old pocket watch from his shirt. The silver case caught the afternoon sun, its worn surface reflecting years of history. 4 generations of Tucker men had carried this watch, and now it might open the door to something that would change everything. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, and raised the watch to the central indentation. The moment the silver watch touched the indentation, Michael felt a subtle change in the air around him. The constant humming that had been emanating from the structure shifted in pitch, becoming slightly higher, more harmonious. The watch fit perfectly into the circular depression, as if it had been designed specifically for this purpose. For a moment, nothing else happened, and Michael felt a flash of disappointment until he noticed the symbols beginning to change. Starting from the center and moving outward in concentric waves, the mysterious markings began to emit a faint blue luminescence. The light pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat, and with each pulse, the symbols seemed to shift and rearrange themselves. The temperature around the door dropped noticeably, creating a thin mist as the cool air met the warm afternoon sun. The vibration in the ground intensified, and Michael could feel it resonating through his boots. Acting on instinct, Michael turned the watch clockwise, just as he had done thousands of times to wind it over the years. The resistance was slight at first, but after about a quarter turn, he felt a distinct click. The humming suddenly increased in volume, and the blue light grew brighter. The symbols were moving faster now, spinning in alternating circles around the watch. The air crackled with what felt like static electricity, making the hair on his arms stand on end. Then, with a sound like rushing air being released from a pressurized chamber, a line appeared down the center of the door. It widened slowly, revealing darkness beyond. Cool air rushed out, carrying with it an odd scent, not musty like you'd expect from an underground chamber, but clean and slightly metallic, like the air after a lightning strike. The door continued to open outward, moving with impossible smoothness despite its massive size and apparent weight. Michael stepped back, his heart racing. The opening revealed a corridor that stretched downward at a gentle angle, disappearing into darkness. The walls were made of the same smooth stone as the doorway, but they emitted a soft, ambient light that seemed to come from within the material itself. The floor was perfectly level, with no signs of age or wear. It looked as pristine as if it had been constructed yesterday, despite having been sealed beneath his family's barn for generations. Gathering his courage, Michael retrieved a powerful LED flashlight from his truck. He tested it before approaching the doorway, relieved to find it still worked despite the other electronic disruptions around the site. The beam cut through the darkness of the corridor, revealing that it extended at least 100 feet before curving gently to the left. The ceiling was high enough that he couldn't quite make it out, and the walls were covered in more of the glowing symbols. Before venturing inside, Michael took several photos with his old digital camera, the one piece of technology that seemed unaffected by whatever force was interfering with his other devices. He carefully documented the doorway, the symbols, and the entrance to the corridor. If anything happened to him, he wanted there to be evidence of what he'd found. He also scribbled a quick note in his pocket notebook, describing the discovery and how he'd opened the door just in case. The logical part of his mind was screaming at him to stop, to wait for experts, to not venture alone into this impossible structure. But there was another part of him, perhaps the same part that had helped his ancestors survive the harsh early days of ranching in Montana, that urged him forward. This wasn't just curiosity. It was a deep, almost primal certainty that he needed to see what lay beyond that curve in the corridor. Taking a deep breath, Michael stepped through the doorway. The air inside was cool, but not cold, and surprisingly fresh. His footsteps echoed slightly, suggesting a significant open space beyond. The ambient light from the walls created an otherworldly atmosphere, making shadows dance and shift as he moved. The symbols continued their gentle pulsing, and he noticed that they seemed to respond to his presence, glowing slightly brighter as he passed. About 50 feet in, Michael heard a sound behind him. He turned just in time to see the massive door slowly swinging closed. His heart jumped into his throat, but before he could run back, he noticed something strange. The pocket watch remained in place in the center of the door, still visible from this side. Somehow he knew this meant he could open the door again when needed. This wasn't a trap. It was an invitation. With the door closed, the corridor took on a different character. The ambient light from the walls grew stronger, and the symbols pulsing became more pronounced. The humming that had been present since he first discovered the doorway was now more melodic, almost like music played at the edge of hearing. Despite the strangeness of his situation, Michael felt an overwhelming sense of rightness, as if he was exactly where he needed to be. As Michael continued down the gently sloping corridor, his initial certainty began to waver. The passage had been curving steadily to the left for what seemed like several hundred feet, and he realized he must be well beyond the boundaries of his barn's foundation by now. The ambient light from the walls cast everything in an ethereal blue glow, making it difficult to judge distances accurately. His flashlight beam seemed to be growing weaker, though he'd just put in fresh batteries that morning. The silence was becoming oppressive. Apart from his footsteps and the faint musical humming of the walls, there was no sound at all. No dripping water, no distant echoes, none of the things you'd expect in an underground structure. The air remained surprisingly fresh, suggesting some kind of ventilation system, but he couldn't feel any air movement. It was as if the entire complex existed in a perfect state of stasis, untouched by time or decay. Every few yards, Michael encountered branching corridors leading off in different directions. He stuck to the main passage, marking his path with small pieces of orange surveyor's tape he kept in his pocket, a habit from his days helping the Forest Service mark trails. But even this simple precaution began to feel inadequate as the complexity of the underground network became apparent. Some passages sloped downward more steeply, others remained level, and a few even seemed to angle upward. After what must have been an hour of walking, doubt began to creep in. What if he couldn't find his way back? What if the door wouldn't open from this side despite his earlier confidence about the pocket watch? His family would have no idea where to look for him. He hadn't told anyone about his discovery. The development company's surveyors weren't due for another week, and his son James rarely called more than once a month. He could disappear down here, and it might be weeks before anyone realized he was missing. The symbols on the walls continued their hypnotic pulsing, but now Michael noticed they were changing subtly as he progressed deeper into the complex. New patterns emerged, more complex arrangements that seemed to tell a story he couldn't quite grasp. Occasionally, he'd come across larger chambers where the symbols formed elaborate murals across the ceiling and walls. These images seemed to depict landscapes and celestial bodies, but something about them felt wrong. The proportions were off, and some of the shapes were impossible to reconcile with any earthly geography he knew. His flashlight was definitely growing dimmer now despite the fresh batteries. The beam barely reached half as far as it had when he entered, and the light had taken on a strange, yellowish tinge. Even more unsettling, his digital camera had stopped working entirely. The screen remained dark, though he could feel it vibrating slightly when he pressed the power button. The last few photos he'd taken showed odd distortions, streaks of light and color that hadn't been visible to his naked eye. The temperature was dropping too, gradually but noticeably. Michael pulled his jacket tighter around himself, wishing he'd brought more supplies. He'd been so caught up in the excitement of discovery that he hadn't properly prepared for an extended underground expedition. His water bottle was half empty, and the sandwich he'd eaten earlier felt like a distant memory. The rational part of his mind urged him to turn back, to return with proper equipment and maybe some help. But just as he was about to heed that inner voice of caution, he noticed something different about the passage ahead. The corridor widened significantly, and the ceiling rose until it disappeared into darkness above. The symbols on the walls here were different, larger, more elaborate, and pulsing with a deeper, more intense blue light. The humming that had accompanied him throughout his journey changed pitch, becoming lower and more resonant. Most intriguingly, there was a change in the air itself. The metallic taste that had been present since he entered was stronger here, and he could feel a definite current of air moving past him. Something about it reminded him of summer thunderstorms, that charged feeling just before lightning strikes. His skin tingled and the small hairs on the back of his neck stood up. 20 yards ahead, the corridor opened into what appeared to be a vast chamber. The ambient light from the walls wasn't strong enough to illuminate its full extent, but he could see massive columns rising into the darkness, their surfaces covered in spiraling patterns of glowing symbols. The floor changed from smooth stone to what looked like metal, its surface etched with concentric circles similar to those around the door that had admitted him to this underground world. Michael stood at the threshold of this chamber, torn between fear and fascination. Everything he'd seen so far defied explanation, but this room promised answers, or at least bigger questions. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that somewhere in the darkness ahead, something was awaiting his arrival. The thought wasn't exactly threatening, but it filled him with a profound sense of unease. Whatever lay ahead would change everything, He was certain of that much. As Michael took his first steps into the vast chamber, his flashlight finally gave out completely. The sudden loss of its reassuring beam left him momentarily paralyzed, surrounded only by the ethereal blue glow from the walls and columns. His heart pounded in his chest as the darkness seemed to press in around him. The humming that had been his constant companion grew louder, more insistent, and the air became thick with static electricity. Then, without warning, the ground beneath his feet began to vibrate. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable, but it quickly intensified. The metallic floor started to emit a low-frequency resonance that he could feel in his bones. The glowing symbols on the walls and columns pulsed faster, their light growing brighter with each beat. The air itself seemed to crackle with energy, and that's when Michael realized he might have made a terrible mistake. The vibrations grew stronger, and he heard a deep rumbling sound from somewhere far below. It wasn't like an earthquake, it was too regular, too mechanical. The concentric circles etched into the floor began to glow with the same blue light as the symbols, but brighter, almost painfully bright. Michael stumbled backward, trying to retreat to the corridor, but his legs felt heavy, as if he were moving through water. Suddenly, the center of the chamber erupted in a brilliant column of light that shot upward into the darkness. The force of it knocked Michael off his feet, sending him sprawling onto the vibrating floor. The light was blindingly bright, forcing him to shield his eyes with his arm. Through squinted eyes, he could see that the beam wasn't just light. It seemed to have substance, like a pillar of liquid energy. The temperature in the chamber plummeted. His breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on his jacket. The humming had become a deafening roar, and the vibrations were so intense that his teeth chattered. The symbols on the walls were moving now, actually shifting positions, flowing like water across the stone surfaces. They seemed to be converging on the central light column, being drawn into it like moths to a flame. In his panic, Michael tried to stand, but the vibrating floor made it nearly impossible. He began crawling toward what he thought was the corridor entrance, but in the chaos of light and sound, he'd lost his orientation. The surveyor's tape he'd so carefully placed was useless now. Even if he could find it, the markers were probably disintegrating in the intense energy filling the chamber. His head was pounding and his vision began to blur. The air felt thick, making it difficult to breathe. The metallic taste in his mouth had become overwhelming, and he felt a strange tingling sensation throughout his body. It was as if every cell was responding to whatever force had been awakened in this ancient chamber. He thought about Sarah, about James, about all the generations of Tuckers who had worked this land. Had they known about this? Had they suspected what lay beneath their feet? Just when Michael thought he couldn't endure anymore, something changed. The light column began to pulse in a different rhythm, slower and more deliberate. The symbols on the walls stopped their frenzied movement and began arranging themselves in new patterns. The vibrations in the floor changed frequency, becoming less violent, but more focused. And then he heard it, or rather, felt it, a presence in his mind. It wasn't exactly a voice, more like concepts and images being projected directly into his consciousness. They came in rapid succession, stars wheeling across alien skies, structures that defied physics, beings of pure energy moving through dimensions he couldn't comprehend. Each image was accompanied by a sensation of vast timescales, of knowledge accumulated over eons. It was too much for his human mind to process all at once. The assault on his senses was overwhelming. Michael's consciousness began to fade, his grip on reality slipping. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was a figure emerging from the column of light, a shape that seemed to shift and change even as he looked at it, refusing to resolve into anything his mind could categorize. Then everything went black. He had no way of knowing how long he was unconscious. When awareness finally returned, it came slowly, in fragments. The first thing he noticed was the silence. The deafening roar had been replaced by the familiar gentle humming. The air was still cool, but no longer freezing. The floor had stopped vibrating, though he could still feel a slight tremor running through it, like the purr of a distant engine. As his vision cleared, Michael saw that the chamber had transformed. The overwhelming brightness was gone, replaced by a softer, more diffuse illumination. The symbols on the walls had stabilized into new configurations, and the central light column had condensed into something else entirely, something his mind struggled to comprehend. He lay there on the metal floor, too weak to move, knowing that whatever happened next would determine not just his fate but possibly the fate of everything he had ever known. Back on the surface, the disappearance of Michael Tucker had not gone unnoticed. Jake Henderson, his closest neighbor and friend of 30 years, had been driving past the Tucker ranch when he noticed something odd. The cattle were clustered near the fallen barn, acting agitated. Having grown up on a ranch himself, Jake knew this wasn't normal behavior. He pulled his truck onto the property, the gravel crunching under his tires as he approached the site of the collapsed structure. The first thing that struck him was the unnatural silence. No birds were singing despite it being mid-afternoon. Even the constant Montana wind seemed to have died down around the barn site. Jake's dog Max, who usually bounded out of the truck to explore, stayed in the cab, whining softly. As Jake approached the barn ruins, he noticed something else. His cell phone had stopped working, showing no signal despite the usually strong coverage in this area. "Michael?" Jake called out, his voice seeming to fall flat in the strange atmosphere. There was no response, but he spotted Michael's truck parked nearby, its driver's door still open. A half-empty water bottle sat on the seat, along with Michael's regular phone. Something about the scene made Jake's skin crawl. He'd been around long enough to trust his instincts, and right now they were telling him something was very wrong. As he moved closer to the collapsed barn, he began to notice details that didn't make sense. The debris pattern wasn't right for a simple structural collapse. It looked more like the barn had been pushed outward from some force below. And there, in the center of the wreckage, he caught his first glimpse of the stone doorway. The sight stopped him in his tracks. In all his years ranching in Montana, he'd never seen anything like it. Jake noticed the orange surveyor's tape tied to a piece of timber near the door, and recognized it as the kind Michael always carried. Looking more closely, he could see that the massive door was slightly ajar, and there was a faint bluish light emanating from the gap. Michael's flashlight lay discarded nearby, along with his digital camera. When Jake picked up the camera, he was surprised to find it vibrating slightly, though it appeared to be turned off. Without hesitation, Jake rushed back to his truck and grabbed his emergency kit, something every Montana rancher kept handy. It contained, among other things, a powerful flashlight, extra batteries, a first aid kit, some rope, and a flare gun. He also grabbed the old CB radio he kept under the seat. While cell phones often failed in the backcountry, the CB radio was more reliable. But when he tried to use it, he got nothing but static across all channels. Something about the doorway seemed to be affecting all electronic equipment. Jake's watch had stopped and his flashlight flickered erratically when he switched it on. Only the flare gun, being purely mechanical, seemed unaffected. He quickly tied one end of his rope to his truck's tow hitch, wrapped the other end around his waist, and approached the door. If Michael was down there, he might need help getting out. As Jake examined the door more closely, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Michael's father's pocket watch set into a circular depression in the center of the door. He knew the significance of that watch, knew it never left Michael's pocket. Whatever had compelled his friend to place it there must have been compelling indeed. Jake touched the watch carefully and felt a subtle vibration run through the metal. The door responded to his touch, swinging open more widely with that same rushing sound Michael had heard hours earlier. The corridor beyond beckoned, its walls covered in softly glowing symbols. Jake thought about waiting for help, about calling the sheriff or search and rescue, but the strange energy emanating from the doorway told him that time might be crucial. Besides, he had known Michael since they were boys. They had always looked out for each other. Taking a deep breath, Jake secured his rope one final time and stepped through the doorway. The ambient light from the walls was just bright enough to see by, though his flashlight still sputtered and flickered. He noticed pieces of orange tape at regular intervals along the corridor, marking Michael's path. Following them, he moved deeper into the underground structure, trying to ignore the way the symbols on the walls seemed to pulse in response to his presence. As he progressed, Jake began to notice changes in the atmosphere. The air grew cooler, and that metallic taste Michael had noticed became stronger. The humming sound that permeated the structure seemed to be building in intensity, and Jake could feel it resonating in his chest. His flashlight was growing dimmer with each step despite the fresh batteries, but the light from the walls was getting stronger, taking on a deeper blue hue. Jake followed Michael's trail of surveyor's tape deeper into the complex, his apprehension growing with each step. The corridor had been curving steadily downward and to the left, and he'd passed numerous branching passages. Without Michael's markers, he would have been hopelessly lost in this labyrinth. The rope trailing behind him offered some comfort, though he worried about its length. He had already used most of it, and the passage showed no signs of ending. Suddenly, the humming changed pitch dramatically, and the symbols on the walls began pulsing more rapidly. Jake's flashlight finally died completely, but it hardly mattered now. The ambient light had grown strong enough to see clearly. Ahead, the corridor opened into what appeared to be a vast chamber. The air here felt charged with electricity, and that metallic taste had become almost overwhelming. As he entered the chamber, Jake stopped short at the sight before him. Michael lay unconscious on the metal floor, but he wasn't alone. Standing, or perhaps hovering, near him was a figure that Jake's mind couldn't quite process. It seemed to shift and change as he looked at it, sometimes appearing humanoid, other times taking on forms that defied description. The figure was surrounded by a soft blue glow that matched the light emanating from the walls. Before Jake could react, the figure turned its attention to him. Instead of fear, he felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over him. Images began flooding his mind. Vast cities beneath the Earth's surface, technologies beyond human comprehension, and a history that stretched back millions of years. He understood then that they had stumbled upon something extraordinary, not just a mysterious structure, but a direct link to an ancient civilization that had existed long before recorded history. The figure, which Jake now understood was a kind of caretaker or guardian, communicated without words. It showed him how this facility was one of many scattered across the planet, placed there by beings who had achieved mastery over energy and matter itself. These sites had been left as waypoints meant to be discovered when humanity reached the right stage in its development. The Tucker Ranch location had been dormant for millennia, waiting for the right person to activate it. Michael began to stir, groaning softly as he regained consciousness. The Guardian shifted its attention back to him, and Jake watched in amazement as a soft light enveloped his friend. When it faded, Michael sat up, looking not just recovered but somehow transformed. His eyes held a new awareness, and there was an energy about him that Jake had never seen before. "Jake?" Michael's voice was steady, despite what he'd been through. "They've been waiting for us, for all of us. This place, it's not just a discovery, it's a gift." He stood up, moving with surprising grace. "They want to help us, to teach us, but we have to be ready to learn." The Guardian continued sharing information with both men, explaining through images and sensations how the facility could be safely accessed and studied. It showed them how to regulate its energy output, how to interpret the symbols on the walls, and, most importantly, how to protect this knowledge until the right time came to share it with the world. As understanding dawned, both men realized the true significance of what had happened. The struggling Tucker Ranch hadn't just stumbled upon an archaeological discovery. It had become the custodian of something far more important. The land, as Michael's father had always said, had provided. But it had provided something far beyond their wildest expectations. The Guardian showed them how to properly seal and unseal the entrance, how to navigate the complex safely, and how to communicate with the facility's systems. The symbols on the walls, they learned, were not just decorative or linguistic. They were part of an interactive system that responded to human consciousness. The strange effects on electronic devices were a side effect of the facility's power source, something that operated on principles that modern science had yet to discover. Most importantly, they learned why this particular location had been chosen. The Tucker Ranch sat at the intersection of several geological and electromagnetic anomalies that made it perfect for hosting such a facility. The generations of Tuckers who had worked this land hadn't just been ranching, they had been unknowing guardians of one of the most important sites on the planet. As the Guardian concluded its initial teachings, it began to fade, merging back into the central column of energy. But before it disappeared completely, it left them with one final message. They were now part of something larger than themselves, part of a process that had been set in motion long ago. The future of the facility, and potentially of human understanding itself, was now in their hands. The story of Michael Tucker and Jake Henderson's incredible discovery at the Tucker Ranch has captured your attention so far. But before we continue with what happens next, I want to take a moment to connect with you, our valued viewers. If you're as fascinated by this remarkable tale as we are, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more amazing stories like this one to light. Now, what we've witnessed so far is truly extraordinary. A struggling rancher's discovery of an ancient facility that defies our understanding of human history. But what happens next will challenge everything we think we know about our world and our place in it. The decisions Michael and Jake make in the coming hours will not only affect their lives but potentially the future of human knowledge itself. This story touches on something deep within all of us, the eternal mystery of what lies beneath our feet, hidden from view yet waiting to be discovered. Throughout history, humans have found remarkable things buried in the earth, ancient cities, prehistoric creatures, and artifacts that challenge our understanding of the past. But what Michael and Jake have encountered goes beyond anything previously documented in human history. Think about the generations of Tucker family members who walked above this hidden marvel, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. Consider the timing of this discovery coming just when Michael was at his lowest point, about to lose everything his family had built. Was it mere coincidence? Or was there a greater purpose at work? These are the mysteries that continue to unfold as our story progresses. Many of you have been sharing your thoughts and theories in the comments section, and we love reading your insights. Some of you have drawn fascinating parallels to other mysterious discoveries around the world, while others have shared personal stories of unexpected findings on your own properties. One viewer recently shared how they discovered Civil War artifacts while renovating their farmhouse, while another found mysterious Native American petroglyphs on their property that had been hidden for centuries. Our channel has always been dedicated to exploring the unexpected, the unexplained, and the extraordinary. From ancient mysteries to modern marvels, we seek out stories that make us question our assumptions about the world around us. The Tucker Ranch discovery represents everything we strive to bring you: authentic encounters with the unknown, moments of wonder that remind us how much we still have to learn about our world and its history. The support from our community has been overwhelming, and we're grateful for every like, share, and subscription. It's your engagement that allows us to continue searching for and sharing these remarkable stories that challenge our understanding of the world around us. If you're new to our channel, make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming revelations, including the conclusion to this extraordinary tale. As we prepare to delve back into the story, remember that what we're about to share next contains some of the most astounding developments yet. We'll learn more about the ancient civilization that built this facility, discover why the Tucker Ranch was chosen, and see how this discovery transforms not just Michael's life but the entire community around him. This story also raises profound questions about humanity's past and future. What other wonders might lie hidden beneath ordinary places? How many other sites like this might exist around the world waiting for the right moment to be discovered? And perhaps most importantly, what responsibility do we have when we stumble upon something that could change our understanding of human history? The journey you're about to witness isn't just about ancient technology or hidden wonders. It's about human nature, about hope rising from despair, and about the unexpected ways our lives can change in an instant. It's about the choices we make when faced with something greater than ourselves, and the courage it takes to accept a destiny we never imagined. Stay with us, because what comes next will challenge your imagination and perhaps change the way you look at the world around you. We're about to return to the Tucker Ranch, where Michael and Jake must make crucial decisions that will affect not just their future, but potentially the future of humanity itself. The story of the Tucker Ranch has changed dramatically since that stormy night, when an old barn collapsed and revealed something extraordinary. Today, 6 months after Michael and Jake's incredible discovery, the property has been transformed, but not in the way anyone might have expected. The ancient facility remains a carefully guarded secret, known only to a select few who have been chosen as its guardians. Michael did end up saving his ranch, but not by selling it to developers. Instead, he established the Tucker Ranch Heritage Foundation, a research organization officially dedicated to studying traditional ranching practices and sustainable agriculture. This public face provides the perfect cover for the facility's continued operation and study. The foundation receives private funding through channels established by those who understand its true significance. The old barn has been rebuilt, larger and stronger than before, incorporating advanced materials that help shield the unusual energy signatures emanating from below. To casual observers, it's just another ranch building, but beneath its unassuming exterior lies the entrance to what might be humanity's greatest discovery. The original pocket watch remains in its place at the center of the door, though now it's protected by sophisticated security systems, disguised as ordinary ranch equipment. Jake's role has evolved too. He serves as the foundation's head of security, coordinating with a small network of trusted individuals who help maintain the site's secrecy. His experience that day in the chamber gave him insights that prove invaluable in understanding the facility's true purpose. Together, he and Michael have begun to grasp the broader implications of what they've found. The Guardian continues to appear periodically, sharing knowledge in carefully measured doses. They've learned that similar facilities exist around the world, each waiting for the right moment and the right people to discover them. The Tucker Ranch site is just one piece of a larger puzzle, a global network left behind by an ancient civilization that understood humanity would one day need guidance to face its greatest challenges. What was once a struggling cattle operation has become something far more significant, a quiet outpost where ancient wisdom meets modern humanity. The cattle still graze peacefully above ground, maintaining the ranch's appearance of normalcy. But in the chambers below, Michael and Jake work with a select group of researchers, slowly unlocking the secrets that have waited so long to be discovered. The remarkable events at Tucker Ranch remind us that extraordinary discoveries can happen in the most ordinary places. They teach us that hope can appear just when we think all is lost, and that sometimes our greatest challenges can lead to our most amazing opportunities. Michael's story shows us that keeping faith in the face of adversity can lead to rewards beyond imagination. As we conclude this incredible tale, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment when hope appeared just as you were about to give up? Have you ever found something extraordinary in an ordinary place? Your stories and perspectives add to the tapestry of human experience that makes our community so special. Remember that sometimes the most amazing discoveries aren't found in distant lands or on mountaintops, but right beneath our feet, in places we pass by every day without a second thought. The world is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered, secrets waiting to be revealed to those who are ready to see them. Before we end this journey, we'd like to remind you to like this video if you found it inspiring, and subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary stories that challenge our understanding of the world around us. Hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss our latest uploads. Share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder that hope can appear in the most unexpected places. Finally, we'd like to leave you with a question to ponder. What mysteries might be waiting to be discovered in your own backyard? What secrets might the familiar places in your life be hiding? Sometimes the most extraordinary things are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey. Until our next adventure, keep exploring, keep wondering, and never stop believing in the extraordinary possibilities that surround us every day. This is where we leave the Tucker Ranch, but its story, and the ancient mysteries it protects continues to unfold beneath the Montana sky.